So our scripture reading today is found in Matthew 6:25. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is life not more than food, and the body not more than clothes?
Happy Sabbath. Well, today, leading up to today and today, there's been a lot of coincidences. Is it tonight that's the anxiety and depression workshop or seminar? Is that happening tonight? Tuesday. Okay, but it's soon. I didn't know that it was happening this soon. I kind of knew about it because my mom had told me, but my sermon today is about peace and anxiety. And I didn't plan that. And if anyone was here for my last sermon, it was about looking at life through a lens of faith, because I'm a pretty skeptical person, so I tend to dismiss God's plan as coincidence. But I think there's too many coincidences leading up to this today that I think that's part of his plan. Although I do think you should definitely go on Tuesday, because they will definitely know more about this topic than me. Yeah, the coincidence is that announcement happened that there's going to be an anxiety seminar. The whole reason I'm giving this sermon is because on the way to work one morning, my wife was playing a sermon about the widow in 2 Kings that was able to pour out oil and was taken care of. And that's what inspired me to write this sermon. And I'll read that story to you guys a little bit later. My wife suffers from pretty bad anxiety. She has stayed awake at night, unable to sleep for fear of a meteor coming down and hitting our house. And that's what anxiety can be. She knows it's not going to happen, but it doesn't change the fear and anxiety she gets from something like that. She has her own struggles and her own, she has progressed with God's help through anxiety and depression, and that's a story she might share sometime. But I actually came up here, I was thinking about asking everyone in the audience, how many of you suffer from anxiety? And raise your hand. Well, actually, I wasn't going to ask to raise your hand because I thought, you know what? That could make people pretty anxious. And then I mentioned to Les earlier that maybe I'm preaching to the choir, because maybe the anxiety of the coronavirus would prevent those people from coming. So hopefully if you're here, it's for a reason, and maybe this will mean something to you, or maybe it's something you can take to somebody else. But instead of asking you guys about your anxieties, I'll talk about my own. Now, I actually am a fairly laid-back person, to the point of it being a flaw sometimes. You can ask my wife. But I do have a few things that will make me anxious. One of them is the fear of public speaking. And it's definitely something that I have to face a lot. As you can see, I'm up here today. But with God giving me strength, I can overcome these things. Another is a fear of failure. So if this sermon doesn't go well, I will be in double jeopardy. But the one I'm going to focus on today is I do have a lot of anxiety that surrounds finance. And sometimes that can be the hardest anxiety for me to shake, because it's like a permanent one, Money is always a problem. Whether you have a lot of money or a little, there is anxiety surrounding it. What do you do with it if you have a lot? Where do you get it if you don't have a lot? But I didn't title this sermon Anxiety, I titled it Peace. Because for me, peace is what you get when you give your anxieties to God. That's what he gives you in return. Now, this is something that I am doing currently, not something that I am done with. I have to do it over and over again. Because even though I have a history in my life of God blessing me when I give him my anxieties, that doesn't stop me from the next time from feeling anxious, from being scared, and from potentially not trusting in him. I'm going to go ahead and read that story I mentioned, 2 Kings 4, because that story mirrors a certain part of my life. So 2 Kings 4, verse 4, the wife of a man from the company of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord, but now his creditor is coming to take my boys as his slaves." Elisha replied to her, "How can I help you? Tell me, what do you have in your house?" "Your servant has nothing there at all," she said, "except a small jar of olive oil." Now, one part of the story that I like is that God does amazing things with what we already have. She says, "I have nothing." And what made her even think of saying, "Oh, I have a little bit of olive oil left in the jar"? You know, if somebody asked you what you had, would you mention the mostly empty jar in your house? No. But she said, "I have a small jar. That's all I have." And Elijah said, "Go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask them for just a few. Then go inside and shut the door behind you and your sons. Pour oil into all the jars, and as each is filled, put it to one side." Again, so God requires faith from us for a lot of things, but he also gives us faith. But can you imagine her going to all of her neighbors and asking for jars, and they say, "Why?" She has to have the faith that he's going to do something with those jars. Every step of the process is give and take with God. And sometimes that's hard, but ultimately, as you'll see later, it's a blessing to have that struggle. So she gets those jars, she goes in, she shuts the door behind herself, and she starts filling them. And they brought the jars to her, and she kept pouring and pouring. And when all of the jars were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another one." But he replied, "There is not a jar left." Then the oil stopped flowing. Right here is, I think, an important lesson for me, is that God gives us what we need and not always more than what we need. The oil stopped flowing when the jars were full, right? She didn't just have a new infinite supply of oil, because if she had that, it starts to become easy to no longer need to trust God because you have this limitless resource. So she went to the man of God and said, "Go sell the oil and pay your debts. You and your sons can live on what is left." It can be hard to be that widow that is just scraping by. I don't know what the original oil jar was like, but I'm guessing that the whole time she was pouring, it wasn't pouring from a full bottle. It was pouring from one that was almost empty the whole time, I'm guessing. That's what I like to imagine. So now I'm going to talk about that story, how that story was mirrored in my own life. When my wife and I first got married, she got called to Chicago. And so we moved there. We didn't know anyone there, didn't have any family there, but we moved up to Chicago. And one thing that a lot of people know about Chicago is that it is expensive to live there. The one-bedroom, one-bathroom apartment that we had in Chicago, the rent was more expensive than the mortgage on our house here in Indiana. But we moved there, and they gave us a moving bonus to help us get up there, which is a blessing. But this is also the first part of the struggle, because when you get a moving bonus, you still have to pay taxes on it. And for some reason, not only did they take the moving bonus taxes out of our first paycheck, they took it out of the second. There was a mistake at the conference office. So our first 2 months in Chicago, we were there with less than a full paycheck. When she had been offered the job, I had gone with her to the interview and stuff, and while we were there, I still am taking classes. I gave a testimony that goes along with my education, and it has been a process as well. I'm still taking classes, but I was taking classes at that time too. So they were like, "Well, we actually have a job for you too." Their school was K through 12, maybe K through 10, I'm not sure, but they had the high school students take classes online through a school in Florida. But in the classroom, they need what's called a distance education facilitator. Basically, a sort of teacher in the classroom to answer any questions in person, to make sure technology is working, and to make sure the kids show up and are actually doing what they're supposed to do. And so they had offered me that job. And so when we moved up there, I didn't go looking for a job because I had one. I even went through the training. I flew to Florida to the school that was providing the education online, and I went through training there, and I came back, and my first day I'm about to go in, the school had to downsize, and so they had to let a teacher go. But instead of letting the teacher go, they let me go and gave him my job. It's a hard thing. Schools all over, the Adventist schools all over the United States are shrinking. Not all of them, but it's a hard time for Adventist education. So of course it upset me, but I don't blame them. It was a hard situation. Do we give the job to this guy and let the teacher that's been here for years just go, or do we give it to him? So we didn't have a second source of income at that point. My wife's was the only paycheck we had. In the first 2 months of us being there, those paychecks were too small, and we wouldn't see the money we paid extra in tax until our tax returns came a year later. We did what we had to do, and my wife, I'm blessed to have her because I don't have as much faith as she does. And she is very insistent upon us paying tithe. And I will sometimes forget to pay tithe. But that's why I'm glad her, because she kept paying tithe even when our paychecks were smaller. And I think that is what allowed God to continue blessing us. So we are struggling to earn enough money. Could have been looking for a different job this whole time, and maybe had a job, but instead I'm now looking for a job while this is all going on, and I'm still taking classes, and I never found a job. Eventually my wife was just like, just stop looking and just try to focus on your schoolwork. But every month she would make sure we paid tithe, and every month we would make it. And there were some months where we were so close to not making it. And these are all true stories. There was a month that we were going to go into the negative before the end of the month based on everything else. But we were looking through our bank statement, and all of a sudden we see a deposit for over $500 in there. And if you do online banking, you can always see where it comes from. It's like Indiana conference, this place, Illinois conference is where we're working. It was just a bunch of numbers. We don't know where the $500 came from. I am a skeptic, so I started thinking, where could it possibly come from? And Sean was like, it's from God. And she was right. I still have no idea where that money came from. So wherever he sent it from, he uses things here on this earth a lot. Maybe he just magicked it into our account. I don't know. But we got over $500 that month, and we were fine. Then you drive a lot in Chicago, and we ran over a nail. We've had really bad luck with tires, by the way. We've had more flat tires in the time we've been married than the rest of my life put together. But we had run over a nail, and we took it to Discount Tire, which praise God for Discount Tire because they do so many things for free. They patch tires, they air them up. I don't know what all they do, but a lot for free. So we go there hoping they can patch it for free. Well, the nail had gone into the sidewall of the tire, and you can't patch that. So we had to buy a new tire. So we started thinking, well, we just got this miniature carpet shampooer, pretty much because our dog peed on our couch. And we had to clean it up. And so we bought the little tiny shampooer to clean up the carpet. Well, we said, we have to return that and use the money we spent on that to buy the new tire. But when they took the car in, they told us they couldn't patch it. And then as we're thinking about that, and they're like putting a spare on, is what we thought, they came back out, and they're like, we just got you a new tire. And we're like, well, how much do we owe? And they're like, it's free. I don't know why. This was my wife's car was new. Had never bought tires from them before. The tires were from the Mazda dealership. There was no reason for them to give us a new tire. We don't understand why. We were so scared that they would realize something was wrong. So we're like, so we don't owe anything? They're like, no, here's your keys. So we're like, let's walk out before they notice what they did. Amen, yes. God gave us a tire, and we needed it. The next thing that happened, we had moved back to Indiana. We were living with my parents at the time, and I was working for an insurance company that pays commission only. So you guys know how that goes. I no longer work for them, so you can tell I wasn't good at it. But to get to work, I had to have a car. And there was a couple days where I didn't get to work because my car was having issues. It wouldn't start sometimes, or it would start acting weird. And I basically took it in and found out it was the battery that was going bad. So I went to, what was it? Was it Advanced Auto Parts? And I had them test the battery, and they're like, yep, this battery is bad. So I was like, okay, how much for a new battery? And the guy's like, did you buy this battery from us? I was like, no, we bought this car used. It came with this battery. And he's like, they probably bought it from us. So he gave me a new battery for free. This is true stories. And at those times in my life, I was not as close to God as I am now. Did not have worship every day, and I had a lack of faith that he was fixing before I even realized I had that lack. Our jar of oil was empty, but every time we poured, a little more came out for us. Over those, I have more growth in my spiritual life during the time I have been married than just my whole life also. It's because of my wife, and it's because of what God's been doing for me over again. You know, when you get married and you move out of home and everything, that's when you're really an adult. God has used my adult life to teach me to trust him. But I am a slow learner. I look back now, though, and I can see that he was doing those things to teach me to trust him, to teach me to give him my worries, so that I could find peace in him. Because even when I was getting those things, you know, I'd get the random money in our bank account. We don't know where it came from. This is great, but like, what about next month? I'm still worried, you know? We get a tire for free. We still return that shampooer because, like, what if there's another thing that happens? God was providing for us, and he was asking me to trust in him, and I was still too scared to. I was still trying to find the right job to get some money here and there so I would be safe, I'd be comfortable. And sometimes I think about this story, and I'm like, man, I am that widow that's just barely scraping by, that just pours out a little more each time, and I think, why do I have to be the widow? Why can't I be Job? God granted him wealth and abundance. He lost it all, but what happened after after Job lost everything he had? Was that it for him? No, he had faith, and it says that God gave Job even more afterwards. And I was like, God, why can't I be Job? But then I started to think about it, and I was like, maybe the reason that I can't be Job is because if I had a lot and I lost it all, would I have the faith that Job had? I don't think I would. Just the struggles that I have gaining and losing a little are hard for me. Losing a lot, losing as much as Job did. Job lost not only all his wealth, he lost servants, he lost cattle, he lost his family. I don't know how I could survive losing my family. Maybe, I don't want to ever take that test. Thank God that I'm not Job, because I don't know if I could handle that. Maybe you never know until it happens, but I don't want to think about it. I think that God gives me enough and takes enough away from me to temper me, because he knows that I'm not ready to be Job yet. Matthew 6:21 says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." Maybe if God gave me as much as he gave Job, then I would be content with my treasures here on this earth, and I would stop storing them up in heaven. But because God has been tempering me, he's teaching me, and again, I'm a slow learner. I'm not putting a lot in the heavenly vault all at once. It's every time he gives me these lessons, it's a little bit here and a little bit here, and I'm slowly trying to store up that treasure in heaven. But it is a constant struggle. Like I said, I do conveniently forget to pay tithes sometimes. And whenever I do that, those are the months where I'm the least comfortable. Even though I might have more money, it's not always about money. Sometimes I'll have more money in the bank account, more of a cushion, but there's something else that is getting to me, that is preventing me from feeling peace. But then my wife is very good, and she reminds me, pay tithe, pay tithe, pay tithe. And the months when we have the least and we still pay tithes are the months when I feel the most peace. It's not necessarily the months when I have the most money and I have the most comfort, but I feel the most peace. Even this last month. So my wife, we have a daughter that's a year and a half old, Cora. She's probably in a room napping back there. Yeah, she's here. My mom came in and my dad had already taken her away to nap. Um, but when that happened, my wife stopped working and stayed home with Cora. And that was really hard for us to do financially. And the only reason we were able to do that is because God blessed us and provided a way for that to happen. But then over Christmas break, the school we work at lost a teacher in the middle of the year. And so they desperately needed someone to fill her position. And so they asked my wife if she would come back to work. And my wife was also very anxious, the theme, about going back to work. She absolutely loved being home with Cora, and she's a phenomenal mother. And she's like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can be away from her. And I will tell you guys a little bit of my wife's story. When she was in college, she was struggling about what to do with her life, and she'd been praying about it a lot. She was at school, she had in the hallway, she needed to get a drink, so she goes to a drinking fountain, and there's an older man getting a drink in front of her. And after he finishes drinking, he stands up, turns around, and he says to her, I feel impressed to tell you that you need to be a teacher. Yeah, it was crazy. She didn't know who this guy was. Turns out he was a religion professor, appropriate. But he didn't know who she was. She didn't know who he was. He just knew that he needed to tell her that she was supposed to be a teacher. And that's what she graduated with, and she is a teacher. But teaching, just because we are following God's will doesn't mean it's always going to be easy. Teaching was hard for her. There is a lot of stress when you're a teacher. One does come from finances because teachers don't make a lot of money. Schools don't have a lot of money to provide resources, so the teachers end up spending what money they do have on supplies a lot of times. And then some of the biggest stressors about teaching can come from the parents of children, because parents love their kids and they want what's best for them. And sometimes when they're getting bad grades, it can seem like what's best for the student is for the mom or dad to go in there and tell the teacher they need to give them a better grade. That's not what's best for your students. And so there was a lot of stress and anxiety and hardship because of teaching. And so when we had Cora, she stayed home, and she's like, I'm never going back to be a teacher. She's like, I'll go back to work someday, but it's not going to be in a school. It's not going to be as a teacher. She stayed home for a year, and after a year, she started looking for jobs, whether it was full-time or part-time. She was going to look for work, but it wasn't at a school. She applied to a bunch of different jobs. My wife is very talented, and she is very charming. Anytime she's actually gotten a face-to-face interview, she has gotten the job. But on all those jobs she applied to, she never got anything more than maybe a phone call or an email. She never got the job. And that's because, if you remember, what was she called to do? To be a teacher. But she was running away from teaching. My wife and I have both been Jonah at different times in our lives. We've run away from God's call for us. But this teacher at IJA left, and they said, please consider coming back. And I was working there at the school full-time. I would drive the van, I would help out in classrooms, I would substitute teach, and I would do state testing. So I was there all the time. But they're like, if you come back, maybe your husband can stay home. I still drive the van for them because they need the van driver, but because my parents are close by and they are so willing to help out and watch Cora, we kind of, in the mornings and evenings, they'll take Cora, and I'll be with her during the day, because we had just personally want to be with her parents as much as possible. So I'm a half stay-at-home dad right now, which of course definitely helps with the finances. But my wife went back to work, and she was so worried about it because she had so much hardship being a teacher. And this is the same school that she had left to stay home with Cora. But since she has been back, she's absolutely loved it. And of course there were hard times where she was missing Cora, but she realizes now, yeah, that wasn't a fluke, that wasn't a mistake when he told me I need to be a teacher. God called her to be a teacher, and that's what she is supposed to be doing because she's so good at it, and she finds joy and fulfillment in it. But it took that faith and that trust to actually go back there and do it. So right now she's teaching full-time, and I'm at home. I lost my train of thought now. But I have reduced my hours. Of course, she's working now, but the reason that we were able to have her stop working in the first place is because God had provided for us. And because she's going back, we are trying to wean off that protection and really be independent adults. And because of that, we ended last month with $40 in our bank account. But that was a blessing because we did not end in the negative. We were so close. Didn't do anything. We were eating anything we could find in our house because we did not want to go in the negative. But because of my wife, and again, I have gone through this journey of constantly being shown, hey, you need to trust me, and if you do, I will bless you. And I'm still so hesitant to pay tithe. By the way, Malachi 3:8-9 says, will a mere mortal rob God? Yet you rob me. But you ask, how are we robbing you? In tithes and offerings. Then it says, you are under a curse, your whole nation, because you are robbing me. Now, God is a merciful God. There have been months where I didn't pay tithe, and Triana didn't remind me, and I didn't tell her that I hadn't paid. He did not curse us. But maybe it is a curse because those months are the months we did not feel God's blessings. And maybe that's enough of a curse. Just the removal of his blessings can feel like a curse. But like I said, $40 last month in the bank account. And the first thing my wife made me do, and I think it is important that she makes me do it because I need to be the one doing it. It's easy to pretend it's not happening when I'm not doing it. She's like, pay tithe. The second our check came in, I paid tithe. And this month has been a good month. Over and over again, God He's been teaching me slowly. He's been tempering me. Maybe someday I will be Job, but I'm not yet. But peace for me has never come from having enough of something. Peace for me has always happened after I have submitted to God and after I've trusted him that I'll have enough. It's not from having enough. It's from trusting that he will make sure I will. Before I end, I want to read that verse again. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Thank you. And returning to Chicago also is a little scary because it's so expensive. But again, I think that he didn't call us there until we were ready to answer, until he'd given us so many examples of trusting in him. Let's bow our heads. Dear God, I just want to thank you for this opportunity, Lord. Sometimes I feel like your call for my life has put me in direct opposition with some of my anxieties and fears. But Lord, you've shown me that that is a blessing because when I sacrifice my time, when I give you my fears and trust in you, you bless me. So over and over again, you call me to something I'm afraid to do. And then when I do it, you bless me afterwards. And I have received so many blessings because of this call. I pray that you be with each and every person here, Lord. If anyone's struggling with anxiety, being scared to trust you, whether it's about finances, family, anything, Lord, there are so many things that we are scared about. I pray that you help them to remember that if they are able to put their trust in you and to take a risk and a leap of faith, that you have a reward waiting for them that's worth more than anything else on this earth, and that is peace, and that is salvation. I just pray that you remind us of that and you give us that peace, Lord, when we really need it. Amen.